Hello again and welcome back to the second weekly broadcast of World Revolution News. It is June 10th, 2011 and I am Thomas Jefferson.
And I'm Emily Pankhurst, and welcome everyone from around the world. Today we will concentrate on the US and the Middle East.
In US news, 54,000 jobs were created in May, down sharply from 232,000 in April, pushing the unemployment rate back to 9.1%. The economic growth was just as pathetic with 1.8% in the first quarter. State and local governments were slashing jobs in the face of huge deficits, right along with sharply declining revenues. The real concerning data is contained when including the marginally unemployed and the part-time employed due to economic reasons. When you combine those with the totally unemployed, the number is 15.9%, up from March which was at 15.7%. Meanwhile, employers from across the nation are complaining of consistent uncertainty in the less-than-thriving economy that has prevented them from hiring. In other U.S. news, the Federal Reserve, which is not federal and has no reserve, on Tuesday, had Chairman Ben Bernanke acknowledge the fact that the economy has slowed down. He also offered no hint that the U.S. private central bank might be considering any more stimulus to accelerate growth, or QE3, to try and help revitalize an overdosed economy. QE, known as quantitative easing, which is attempting to pull the economy from this deep recession and hopefully spur a recovery. The Fed has already slashed overnight interest rates to near zero and bought a total of more than $2 trillion in government bonds altogether. The Fed's current $600 billion round of government bond buying, known as QE2, is due to end this month. And then, on top of it all, the foreign nations that have helped finance the U.S. debt in previous years are poised to reduce their bond holdings too. That may leave U.S. investors to fill the gap. And if that happens, it will look just like Japan, where 94% of the public debt is held domestically. With that much money locked up in public debt financing, the private economy could find itself unable to get the capital it needs to grow, and creating an ugly inner cycle of debt funding. When the last resort of the Federal Reserve is buying our own government bonds at auction, that is a certain sign that the Ponzi scheme is falling apart. Or as legendary Wall Street investor Stanley Druckenmiller recently said, there is a phony buyer of $19 billion per week of Treasury bonds.
First, to the Middle East and Northern Africa. Throughout the region, from Libya to Bahrain to Yemen, there continues the cross-continental revolution. As mentioned at the end of the show last week, there was a border protest with Israel last Sunday, in which Syrian state television said as many as 23 were killed in the protests, while Israel has placed the number of deaths at fewer than 10. According to U.S. State Department spokesman Mark Toner, this is clearly an attempt by Syria to incite these protests, adding that Damascus hoped to divert attention from its internal problems, which includes a bloody uprising, with 1,200 dead since January. What you won't hear in the mainstream media is that the second most populous city in Israel, Tel Aviv, also had an estimated 20,000 people protesting on Saturday. They were calling for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to recognize the establishment of Palestine. In Iran, another important development in the Middle East, A report by the bipartisan RAND Corporation, which was given the original label, Think Tank, back in the 1960s, claims that Iran could have a nuclear weapon within 2 months. The report is based on recent findings by the International Atomic Energy Agency. Gregory Jones of RAND stated that despite reports of setbacks in its nuclear program, the Iranian regime is steadily progressing towards a nuclear bomb, and there is nothing the US can do to stop Tehran, short of military occupation, according to Jones. He finally went on to say that the reality is that the US and Israel have failed to keep Iran from developing a nuclear warhead whenever it wants. Last, but not least in the Middle East, the Yemen situation looks to be on the fence as to whether it has truly been overthrown. President Ali Abdullah Saleh, recovering from burns on 40% of his body and a collapsed lung in an attack at his presidential compound. A diplomatic source with knowledge of Saleh's condition says one shrapnel wound is almost 3 inches deep. After Saleh went to Saudi Arabia for medical assistance, the tribal leader and vice president, which is now Yemen's interim leader, agreed on a ceasefire. Saudi Arabia continues to act as a safe house for the overthrown monarchs, but one wonders how long they can maintain their delusion of the regional situation that is taking place.
Finally, updates from the last program, the Spain movement, that has occupied Madrid's central square for 27 days, will vacate this Sunday. This was announced last Wednesday. The movement demands reform in Spain, which it sees as serving financial markets and the vested interests of politicians, rather than citizens suffering through an unemployment rate of 21%. Most of the protest camps are expected to go, as the demonstrators move to street protests and neighborhood assemblies. This is by no means the end to anything. They will continue nationwide protests on June 11th, when new mayors will be sworn in around the country. Greece, meanwhile, vowed to stay the course, calling on the government to abandon a loan rescue deal with the European Union and the International Monetary Fund, saying this will actually make the economy worse. Now, thousands of Greeks seem to have found a solidarity they never knew existed. The size and vitality of the Greek protest movement has taken many in the country by surprise, with between an estimated 300,000 and 500,000 people in one day.
And a follow-up with Japan, where an alleged cover-up of radiation data by the Japanese government has come to light. Tokyo has expressed regret for not promptly disclosing some important results of radiation monitoring near the Fukushima nuclear plant, soon after the accident on March 11th. The government also failed to disclose the high radiation levels in local plantation, 30 to 50 kilometers from the plant. On March 15th, radioactive iodine was detected 38 kilometers northeast of the plant, but the Japanese government reported at a news conference several hours later that the nuclear fuel was indeed intact. The sad part is that radioactive iodine has a high effect on children, and the fact that they waited to fully disclose this is, well, terrible.
That's the end of this episode. We will hopefully see you next week on June 17th, and thank you for watching the World News Network.
Remember one thing until next week, it is the united banking cartel against us, and not me against you, for we are the many, and they are the few.
Have a good weekend.